Hola, buen día. You'll notice this is my third visit to Santiago and I haven't lost my British accent yet, so I'm still working on that. Well, it's great to be here, and what a fantastic audience and turnout, so just congratulations to you as well for all coming. I think I was listening to the presentations this morning and thinking that you've got really some fantastic ingredients for a foundation here in Chile. That is to say, you've got ministry support, you've got great industry support, you've got a plan, you've got a vision, so you've got some really good ingredients to become leaders in Latin America. I really believe that. So what I'm going to do is go through the experiences, as Carolina said. I do very much as I'm directed by Carolina, so I'm going to stick to my script and share with you some of the UK experience, but also some of the parallels that I see here in Chile, and try and give you a view of our journey and how that might look for yourselves. So first of all, we have very similar industries in the sense that they are very important to economic growth. We heard that this morning, that the construction sector is very fragmented. It's very important in terms of job creation. It's very important not least because it creates public infrastructure, and from that we're able to create economic growth. So it's a fundamentally critical industry, but also, as we've learnt today and been discussing today, it has some inherent system wastage rates. Now, it's somewhere between 30 to 35%. Various reports from the UK, from Europe, North America and elsewhere consistently state this figure of between 30 to 35%. I think we heard it today as well in Carolina's presentation, that this is the approximate amount of waste in terms of cost, but also in terms of material waste. And we know a lot of the reasons. They're not a mystery to us. We know why that is. We know that there's poor coordination, poor collaboration, siloed ways of working. I love that cartoon, by the way. We know these issues. They aren't a mystery to us. And in fact, over the past 80 years, it's been something like 70 reports. This is just a view from the UK. So I really wonder what this would look like from a worldwide view, the amount of reports that have been written on construction, both academia, industry reports, and government-led reports. It must be a staggering number. So in 2011, we decided to actually take some real positive action in the UK with the construction strategy, which set out how we could use public procurement, give leadership from the government sector, build an industry collaboration to start to tackle these fundamental issues that we've been listening to and talking about this morning. We set some targets in the UK, and I've just seen some of the targets that you've got here in Chile. They're very similar. You set a long-term target for a vision to achieve some really key important objectives, such as economic growth, lower cost of delivery, more timely delivery of projects. It's really interesting. We always measure things in terms of financial cost, but actually if you consider the impact of an airport being delayed by over 5 years, which is the case in Germany, not known for its inefficiencies actually, Germany, but it's over 5 years late on an airport which is fundamental to its economic trade. So that's obviously costing, in a capital sense, quite a lot of money, billions of euros, but also there's a social impact because the trade and the movement of people that airport will help deliver is also impacted. This is a really, really important issue we're trying to deal with here. So I wanted to talk about some of the UK approaches, the strategy we took in the UK, and then draw some parallels with what I've already seen here in Chile. So UK decided to leverage the public procurement spending on projects, which is significant. It's around 30% that the UK spends public spending into construction as a percentage of total GDP for construction. That's really significant. That's really significant. And I'll tell you why, because the construction industry doesn't change by waving our arms around and saying good words. This was a statement that was made by our chief construction advisor in 2013. What he was saying basically is that yes, there are all these reports, these academic reports, industry reports, and yes, we've all said we really need to do better. We're all trying to do better. But actually, the observation he made was that that isn't how the industry works. The industry structurally responds to projects, to contracts, to project tenders. That's how the industry is formed. So we've got to change some of the drivers, and some of the drivers are public procurement. So our strategy here relies on two things, and it's very much paralleled with the conversation that Carolina's just had with you, which is to say that public needs to take leadership, and we've seen that here today with your Minister Indiraga and with Eduardo Bertran, etc. And that's very important that you've got that leadership and that support as well from the Ministry of Economy. And that gives direction, that gives vision, and then we can align behind that. The second half of this, of course, is all of you. And I think the industry side need help as well in terms of standard ways of working, a definition, as you've just seen, for what BIM means to us here in Chile. And then how do we actually communicate with each other in that process of construction? So providing standards and providing a foundation for industry is very important. This statement, we all borrow from each other in these presentations, and I think one key message that I heard from the European Commission very recently was their observation that at a sector level, the only way that we're all going to benefit is by having a broader adoption of BIM, something called the network effect. If we increasingly use phones, we can increasingly connect with each other. And the parallel is very similar here with regards to construction. If we increasingly share data, if we increasingly share models, then we can increasingly get a better performance and productivity as a whole nation. Industry engagement, this was really important for us in the UK. I can't stress how important the social aspect of this. This is really about social change. The technology is 10% possibly of this debate. It's what we see on the screens. It's the visible bit. It's the eye candy. I don't know if that's quite translates, but it's the bit that makes us get interested because we see an interesting visualization or a fly-through or something, and we think that's BIM. But actually, this is about social change. That's been the real lesson, I think, that we've observed over the past 5 years, that there's been tremendous engagement through meetings like this happening all over the UK, and increasingly we're seeing of that around Europe as well. So, and approximately that's about 300 organisations that have been involved in the UK experience. Something else which has changed this dynamic is around social media, engagement through social media. And I think that's really important. I've travelled down the length of Chile because I flew in from Lima on a rather interesting route to get to you. And I really appreciated then just how big your country is. And I think therefore it's very important that you focus on the tools that are at our disposal today, online training, social media, etc., which we've used to good effect in the UK. We've got something like 12,000 followers on Twitter as well, so that's a very important aspect. We've created, on the right-hand side, we've created communities of best practice, so that's architects sharing ideas around what BIM means to them. It's contractors doing the same thing in their language, addressing their issues and challenges, and also SMEs, very important to think about small, medium-sized enterprises as well, and thinking about how they can share information together and understand what it means to them. And that's, again, been a tremendous success in the UK. So digitalization is the process of making an industry or an organization digital. Digital process, digital data, digital technology. But what is BIM? You know, to many people, this is BIM, or perhaps this is some energy analysis through a building systems control system, timeline sequencing, pre-construction planning, getting 10% savings on, or reduction in the construction phase, very important. And that's one aspect of BIM. So BIM means many different things to many people. The first thing we did is build a common understanding. The first thing we did in the UK is, okay, this we need to make simple. We need to make this very clear. And again, the parallel I'm going to draw for you to Carolina's presentation was around the idea of lonely BIM, collaborative BIM, and integrated BIM. And we said that, okay, as the UK government, we want to create a collaborative BIM where we can all share in the benefits as an industry, as a private industry, but that economic benefit will also be provided to the public client, so we can get better value for money and more buildings built, more infrastructure built on time, etc. That was a very important concept to us, that we had something to aim for, because the other side of this red line is something called integrated BIM. We're not there yet, but we've got to still get value today, and we believe that we can get value. Some in the region of 10% is broadly estimated to be the value attributed to the BIM program in our public estate, as we were hearing earlier from Mal in the presentation that he gave. It's been a very value-adding experience, but also we had to do some very standards-based work, very backroom work where we sat down for a long period of time and thought about what is it we need, what are the core elements, the artifacts, the documents that we need to build clear structure, to give the industry clear guidance and a clear foundation to stand upon for the long term. So it's not something you could necessarily rush. We actually took something like 2 years to build this, and we're going to hear some of this in the presentations later on today. We took a view that BIM is actually can be viewed in 4 different ways, around the policy aspects, the procurement, contract issues, around data issues, technical issues, process. Again, really important that we focus on a process that's for everyone, that we've got main contractors involved, that you've got the different tiers of contractors involved, but you've also got the SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises involved. The last point is often forgotten, but it's one of the most important, which is about people. You know, you've really got to help upskill the industry. So for the academics in the room, for the training providers in the room, technology providers in the room, you know, I'd say to you that you really need to pay attention and focus on how you can align your training practices and help people upskill. People that are in the industry now, but also new graduates, new people coming into the industry. And just a bit of a side note here, actually, is that one of the things that I see looking back from our 5-year program is that we've made the industry really a much more attractive industry to be part of and to be proud of, and attracting new talent into it. So they're not just going off into manufacturing sectors or wherever, we're actually attracting talent into the sector. We made some really clear statements about what we wanted as a public client, and it was about data for us. We wanted to ensure that we had data, as we were hearing from Eduardo Bertrand earlier as well, is that it's very important that we can think about operating the estate, because that's where 80% of the cost actually lies for running the public estate, approximately 20% in the construction, in the design and construction phase. So we made a very clear statement that we want data. So in addition to the top right-hand corner where you see the PDF drawings, we all recognize those. That's what we're used to delivering over the past 40, 50, 100 years, 200 years, etc. Just schematics and drawings. So we wanted the native file models, the native models, in whatever format they were developed in, but also in the bottom right corner, we wanted data. How can we make decisions about the running of this building or railway for the life of that, which could be 40, 50 years or more. Right at the beginning, and I think we're going to hear about this, your experiences and your plans on this afternoon, is that we did quite early on, because we were doing a lot of stuff in the background, developing standards, doing the, let's say, less interesting exercises, but very important exercises, we had to create momentum and successes so that we could really see some progress. What we did quite early on, some illustrations here, are work on some pilot projects. I know you've got different types of classifications of pilot projects here in Chile, which is a really good idea, and I think a very good way to accelerate that progress and demonstrate signs of success. The 20% there, by the way, was the first project we did, which was an estimate of the financial value that project delivered in its capital phase. And a really interesting social thing, we always talk about the numbers, but I remember the story from, this is a prison project in the southeast of the UK, and the governor of the project said that she now felt that she could actually deliver the handover of that project because she felt so comfortable and confident. She'd walk through all of the different aspects, health and safety issues, security issues, fire issues, etc., that she was part of that briefing team, which isn't a very easy thing to quantify, but a very powerful thing as a personal experience for her and her team. Again, very important point is that BIM, because of the B in BIM, it's often perceived to be historically about buildings, about the vertical construction. What we wanted to do quite early on is show that it wasn't just about square-looking buildings like prisons and so on, but you'll see here some very ornate architectural expression, Palladian style. This is a town hall and a civic library in the north of England. So that was part of our observation projects in your terms, and also some infrastructure projects as well, infrastructure developments, roads and railway projects. One of the biggest in Europe, in fact, this is Crossrail, which is approximately 16 billion pounds, well, it's about $16 billion with the exchange rate now, so yeah, 16 to $20 billion US. So a very important project for the UK in terms of economic growth. And that train had already left the station, so to speak, to use that analogy, and BIM was introduced into that kind of retroactively to get some increased benefits on that project. Overall, as Mal mentioned earlier, the overall program we've seen, including the construction strategy as a high level, has saved the UK government in the region of about $3 billion US over the past 2 years. And we've got greater expectations going into the future. Also very important to note that this is, again, going back to that idea of it's not just about design and construction, it's where we mostly spend our time, but it's about operations and maintenance, so we're beginning to explore benefits there as well. We're doing some really interesting things. Technology is moving so fast in this space, which is why a really important guidance that we had early on was not to be too prescriptive at the technology level. Some countries I've seen have gone into a lot of detail about prescribing the exact workflow and the mechanical steps that you go about modeling a building or a road or whatever. And I fear that sometimes constrains innovation, because what we couldn't have predicted is the incredible fall in the price of technology to do laser scanning now very rapidly, very quickly, and in this case demonstrating you can actually identify objects from the laser scanning as well. So you're accelerating that process of gathering the existing conditions so that you can better understand how to predict the future performance of that estate. So those were some of the benefits in terms of projects, in terms of financial savings. I really want to highlight the shift in the industry. You know, we've seen a tremendous shift over the past 5 years in terms of engagement with sessions like this around the UK occurring, great interest, a lot of conversations. It's provided a really good way for the industry to come together and address some of those systemic issues that we talked about earlier. If you've not seen this before, this is a general description of adoption of new technologies. It's a very general model, and it talks about the different stages of maturity that technology goes through, from initially innovators, people who are just very technology curious, trying things out, experimenting, exploring. Then it moves into the next phase called early adopters, and it comes to a critical point when it either fails to cross what's called the chasm into the early majority, and then it falls back and just stays as a niche idea, a very specific idea, or it transitions. And this transition point is very key in its life cycle into what's called the early majority, which is where we are now placed in the UK with what we call collaborative BIM. And this was a survey from the MBS, I think in 2015, approximately. A small little story I was telling one of Carolina's team, Gustavo, yesterday. We were on the metro just down the road, and I said, well, it's funny because about 3 years ago, I was taking it's a metro in London, it's called the Tube. I was taking a metro across London with a colleague who had just joined our task group, so the team here just joined. He's very near retirement, he's a building services engineer. We had a discussion about what grumpy means, because I said he's a building services engineer that's near retirement, and he sometimes takes a pessimistic, a skeptical view of life, and he readily admits that himself. His name's Rob. You won't mind me saying that. But he said two things. He said, first of all, BIM is the best thing to happen to my industry in my generation. And the second thing he said was really interesting. He said, the government's BIM program is the best thing the government had done for his industry, with the exception of health and safety, which is a really important thing. So that really resonated with me. I thought that was a really interesting idea that he was highlighting there, that this was a social change as well. We talked about it earlier, leadership, public leadership in particular. What this is saying, if you can't read at the back, is basically a survey. I'm going to confess I'm a statistician by profession, by trade, so I'm a little bit skeptical myself of stats, but I thought this was a really interesting one to share, because what it says is that the UK industry, 70% of the UK industry believed that the government would require collaborative BIM, what we call level 2 BIM, by 2016. It also said that it felt the government was going to stick by that commitment and make BIM across all public sector works as a requirement. And that, I think, is really important to giving leadership, because then the industry can organise. We talked about earlier the fragmentation industry. It's no one's responsibility necessarily to go in a particular direction. So governments can provide that confidence to invest. This is a view from a small business just inside London, which is called, they're a small architectural practice called David Miller Architects. And they looked at the cost of their training to adopt BIM, and their hardware costs, their process costs, and so on, as a percentage of their overall staff costs. So just to get the colours right, so we've got blue is their staff cost, that's the bottom line. Green is their BIM training costs, and etc. And then the red line at the top is their fee income as a practice over 4 years, I think. Yeah, 4 years. What this is showing, this is a small business of about, originally it was about 6-8 employees, it's now about 20 employees, so an SME. What this is showing is that the marginal investment to change as a small practice is very modest compared to what they are able to do in terms of size of projects. In David Miller's words, it allowed him to compete more equally with the big boys, that's how he described it, with the bigger practices, take on bigger projects and deliver better product as a result of that, better information, etc. We might have seen this one already a little bit earlier. So this just highlights the savings at a macro, at a country level. This is like our school report card, and the big number is what we look at in the top right-hand corner, which is the approximately $2 billion US dollars. This was just in the financial year 2014-2015. We had savings earlier as well in the previous financial year. So the financial savings, yeah, very important, of course. The bottom right figure is also a promise that was made by our minister back in 2012. This was not about penalising the industry, making it do more in terms of red tape and bureaucracy, squeezing margins even further. This was not about that. This wasn't about reducing public works either. We're going to commit to keep the spending level the same in terms of spending on infrastructure and public buildings. We wanted to get more for that money. What the 5 + 2 = 7 means is that for every 5 schools that we pay for, that we get 2 for free. So we're getting 7 schools for every 5 that we now pay for. That is a really important commitment to industry. Moving towards a conclusion now, and I wanted to sort of share a vision for you and kind of the idea of collaboration. You know, it's been, we have a different language, and I'm working on my Spanish, I promise. But we have a different language, but we can actually collaborate very well on this topic. And I think it's been incredible that, and a very enjoyable experience with the team here, and very impressive to see what you've done in such a short space of time as well. And we're seeing this collaboration happen around Europe and with different regions as well. This is the EU BIM task group of now 21 countries collaborating at the public sector level on this topic in terms of encouraging digitalization of the sector, increasing the modernization of it, and sharing a recommendation of how we bring this into Europe consistently so that we avoid confusion, so that we avoid doing it in different ways and actually adding a cost burden to the private sector by doing it in a French way, a Spanish way, a British way, etc. So that's what this group is about, and it's funded by the European Commission for a further year and a half. So we've got hopefully some developments to share out of that as well at some point. So I wanted to conclude and I'll leave you with a few thoughts. I'm really optimistic for you. It's been incredible collaboration that we've had so far, and we hope that we're able to continue that into the future as well. We've got great ingredients that we touched on in terms of public leadership. We can see that accelerating the adoption levels around the world, but here as well in Chile. Private sector work, I was asked earlier as well about, is this just the public sector thing? Do we not need to worry about it if we just do private sector work? And actually we've seen that this really does start to transition into the public sector work as well, because the public sector clients see benefits that are happening in the public space. Common standards are emerging around the world, and let's try and unify those and align to the same ones. And I really would encourage you to step towards this digital construction sector and become leaders in the Latin America region. Thank you. Gracias.